So welcome to the OLLI Lecture Series. I am Liz Wilson, and I'm going to turn it right over to our workshop leader, Jeff Hollander, to introduce our speaker. Jeff?
Okay, thank you, Liz. And we're so happy to have Kostya Kennedy with us today. It's not just that he's a Stony Brook graduate with honors, but he's a person that's prominent in the world of sports in many, many areas. And his career has had many highlights. Many of them are authoring books, which have been bestsellers on the New York Times. But at the same time, he's also worked with Sports Illustrated in many capacities and has put together quite a collection of accomplishments while he was there. But to get back to his career, not only did he graduate from Stony Brook with honors, but then he went on to the School of Journalism at Columbia University, where again, graduating with honors, he received a fellowship from the Pulitzer Group at their School of Journalism. When he worked in his early jobs were with Newsday as well as many other things in the field. But more importantly, he has stayed true to his mission, which is basically giving us an overview of what might be controversial, might be of interest to many people that weren't necessarily as aware of the fact that certain things created controversy in the lives of various athletes. And I think that as he goes through his presentation today, we're going to get a better chance to understand what made Pete Rose tick, what went wrong. We're going to look briefly at people like Joe DiMaggio and how his influence and his records might have spilled over to some of the superstars of even today, like Aaron Judge. But these things are all going to be presented by him a little bit later on. What I would also like you to know is that he has worked with so many different types of online, and of course today is mostly online media, the New York Times, the LA Times, the Look magazine, Life, Time, as I said, Sports Illustrated, Yahoo, CNN, Parade magazine, etc. And he's also taught at the prominent schools of journalism like the Tisch Institute of Global Sports at NYU, as well as at the graduate school at Columbia. So he's extremely accomplished, but he also has 3 major books that have been bestsellers and have won awards in their field. Each year they were published. So I think in looking back and looking over his career, we're not only proud of him as a Stony Brook University graduate, but more importantly, a person who really understands the world of sports, likes to make us think, not just read. And I think today we're going to find it a stimulating discussion, which will follow his presentation. So with that, welcome, Kostya. We're happy to have you back where you belong.
Jeff, Kostya, just before we turn it over, one thing, point out, Kostya agreed to take questions along the way as well as at the end. If you could please either raise your hand electronically or put comments in the chat room.
Okay, thanks, Larry.
That's great. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for that nice introduction. It's great to be here, back where I belong. Indeed, the one thing you left out, the most important thing, is that I started off working at the Statesman in the 1980s, covering the Stony Brook Seawolves. They were actually then the Patriots, right? I think we all remember that. Sam Kornhaus was our football coach, and Joe Castigli was the hoops coach that led us to the finals of the ECAC. I ended up doing a big story on Joe after he had his, for those of you who know, but he had got into some NCAA trouble, and I did a big story on him for the New York Times. So I had a great time at Stony Brook. I played pit hockey, maybe with some of you guys. I lasted about 2 games. The ambulance was always parked right by. So that made me think another sport was probably a better choice. I was a philosophy and English major. And last roots, I also, my first sort of professional jobs was I was the sports editor at the St. James Times and the Three Village Herald and that whole network of what was then weekly newspapers. So I wanted to talk today about Pete Rose with the initial. I'm happy to take questions on absolutely anything. I covered baseball for a long time. I was glad to hear you guys were solving the playoff format situation beforehand, so that's good. I think we all agreed 154 games and then 7-game playoff series. That'll that'll eliminate things like the flukish three-game wins by underdogs. So I do a lot of work for MLB Network. Baseball is really kind of my sport. I've covered hockey and quite a bit, and covered football as well. But my books three of my books have been baseball books. And when Jeff suggested I come and speak with you guys, I was happy he did. We talked about what might make sense, and it seemed to me that maybe bringing up the Pete Rose discussion would have a little interest for people. It remains a very live debate about the fate of Pete Rose. Larry, I don't know if you want to bring up the slideshow just to sort of carry us through. There's just some pictures here that'll help us as we talk about this. I wrote a book on Pete in 2014. It came out, and the book is called, as we'll see on the slide when it comes up, it's Pete Rose: An American Dilemma. And for me, the reason why this was an interesting topic was the dilemma of Pete Rose being that he was the most ethical baseball player you will ever find. His devotion to the game, what he gave to the game, not just, yes, everybody knows he like ran to first base on a walk and he slid hard. This is a guy who was out there long before everybody else, 100 swings right-handed, 100 swings left-handed, 10 bunts from each side of the plate, then go out with the groundskeeper and scoop up the balls and bring them back in because there's nobody else there, so you can keep hitting. He was the ball player. If you're a baseball fan, there was no choice but to love Pete Rose, if you were being honest. That's why Bart Giamatti, the commissioner who banned him, absolutely adored Pete Rose, and it broke his heart to have to run him out of the game. Well, he didn't run him out of the game, have to escort him out of the game by his own doing. So just to outline the dilemma and say why it's become of renewed interest now is Pete was a gambler, and in addition to the way he played baseball, he gambled and he bet on baseball. And this, for anybody who's been in a baseball clubhouse of any kind, there's a plaque in every professional clubhouse that I've ever been in, major leagues or minor leagues, affiliated minor league, that states that gambling is prohibited by any player, manager, coach, trainer, or employee of the club. Now, Pete wasn't a big reader, so it's possible he didn't really see that, but I'm guessing he knew the prohibition against gambling. If you want to flip through to the next slide, that's fine, Larry. When he was caught betting on the game, he didn't admit it, and he was banned from baseball in 1989. And he was no longer playing at that point. He was the manager of the Reds, and he was told that he could no longer be in baseball. He could no longer have a job in the game. And this was decreed by Bart Giamatti, a brilliant man who was then commissioner of baseball. He'd been former president of Yale, among other things. And when he left the game, he was very much eligible for the Hall of Fame, just like everybody else. And then he had retired in 1986, and in 1991, he was getting close to his eligibility, which is going to be on the actual 92 ballot, I think is how it broke down. And the Hall of Fame was uncomfortable with having Pete Rose potentially get in the Hall of Fame. So they made up a rule. They said, hey, if you're on baseball's ineligible list, you can't be in the Hall of Fame. And they voted on it, and they decided that rule would pass. And now I'm going to give you a list of all the players in baseball who might, by their accomplishments, be in the Hall of Fame, who are prohibited to be in the Hall of Fame by this rule. You might want to take out a pen to write down the name of this list. Here we go. Pete Rose. That's it. Nobody else. It's the Pete Rose rule. Even Shoeless Joe Jackson, who was the famous other player who bet on his game, he was eligible and might have been voted into the Hall of Fame anytime from 1936 when the Hall of Fame opened till 1991 when this rule was put in place. He was absolutely eligible to do so. Pete Rose, as many of you know, was the all-time hits leader, MVP, three-time World Series champion. His credentials for the Hall of Fame in terms of player worthiness are not in question, even from his detractors. So what I wanted just to kind of talk about a little bit is the landscape around sports betting has certainly changed in recent years. I don't know how many of you have a little something riding on the Guardians and Yankees today. But if you did, you could do so on your cell phone. I don't gamble at all. I don't bet. Every now and then $2 on a horse on a Wednesday afternoon and in the summer. But it's right there for everybody, and people are betting like crazy on the game. Did that change what we think about Pete Rose? The fact that a betting outfit such as DraftKings is advertising at ballparks, major league ballparks across the country. Did this change in any way what we think of Pete Rose? You want to go on to the next slide? These are just really slides for reference point for to look at, Larry. So if you want to just keep us moving through them. Here he is as retired, coming back to the stadium. I see there was a question about if I interviewed Rose for my book that came up in the chat from Len. When I was setting out to do the book, I was with Sports Illustrated, and I'd gotten to know Pete because I interviewed him for a Joe DiMaggio book. I spent some time with him, and I'd written a little bit about him over the years. And when I decided to do the book, I called him up, and his first question was like, "How much are you going to pay me?" And I said, "Pete, listen, I don't begrudge him that. There's plenty of celebrities that want to control. Keith Richards is one of the great biographies that you'll ever read. It's called Life. It's by an LA Times, right? It's a piece of literature, better than the Springsteen book. And he got paid for it, and that's fine, right? If that's what the agreement is. But I said, Pete, listen, I can't give you $1. We're not having this discussion, because if I'm in bed with you, so to speak, it makes it a different kind of book. So he did not cooperate with me. That said, I knew where Pete was. He lives a public life. He signs autographs at scheduled times in Las Vegas. That's great. Yeah, just keep moving through these, Larry. Every couple of minutes or so. That's perfect. Here he is saying how much he'd like to be in the Hall of Fame. I'm sorry, I just lost my train because I'm trying to look at the chat as well. I knew where he would be, and I got access to him in various ways through a lot of people I knew in the game. Also, he didn't shut anybody down. So I spent a lot of time with his brother, Dave Rose. I spoke to his ex-wife. Sure, he's reconsidering letting me do that, but I spent a lot of time with Petey, his son, who is a phenomenally interesting character. Just as an aside, it's sort of this tragedy in a way. I know Norman Mailer's son a little bit too, and they are analogous to me in many ways. It's not easy to be Pete Rose Jr. And the player who has played more minor league games than anybody in baseball history by a large margin is Pete Rose Jr. Because he just couldn't give up on the dream, even though he wasn't talented enough to get there. But that's how he was gonna, make his dad proud. So I'm saying this just to say I spoke to a lot of people around him. The one quick story I'll then say is I was at an event for him. There you see he actually is already in the Hall of Fame. Meaning his plaque is not in the Hall of Fame, but his jersey and some memorabilia is. Larry, actually just hold for 1 second on that, because I'll tell this quick story about access to Pete. He was at I went to an event that he was at in Cincinnati. There were a bunch of Hall of Famers all together doing a charity event. They said 8.5 Hall of Famers because there was Winfield, Molitor, Yount, Bench, Morgan, a few other guys. And then Rose, Winfield, so 8 Hall of Famers, and then Pete, who's half a Hall of Famer, I guess. And I saw him out there, and this was around the time of Hurricane Sandy. And at this point, he knew that I'd been around him a little bit, and he acknowledged me. If I got to where he was and he was being paid for his time, he was happy to talk to me. That was the thing he wasn't going to do. He was not going to talk to anybody or do anything that he wasn't getting paid for. But if he's sitting in a chair and somebody else is paying for him to sit in the chair, he'll talk to you. So he said, "Oh, how's it going?" Told him a little bit about New York. Said, "Oh, I'm going to be in New York next week." And I knew that he was going to be, because the Syosset Little League, Syosset, Long Island, not far from where many of you are right now, had booked Pete Rose as their year-end banquet speaker. So it's probably a pretty well-endowed Little League. And I'd known that he was going to be there and gotten a invite to this year-end banquet. So about 5 or 6 days after this meeting in Cincinnati, I go out to this event, and Pete comes in, and he sees me, and he really does a double take, like, wow, this guy's stalking me, which was kind of true. I was stalking him. And I went into the event, and the event is sort of like, it's a banquet dinner. It's like being at the bar mitzvah. You got tables of 12, and you go get your salmon or your chicken, and you come and you sit down and eat it. And everybody is there, and they're all like little leaguers or parents or coaches, and then me, right? And Pete gets up, and he's answering questions from the little leaguers, and they've submitted them by paper, and they're usually things like, who'd you get your first hit off of? Who was the hardest pitcher to face? Things like that. Then one person asked the question, should Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens be in the Hall of Fame? This ties in a little bit to what we'll talk about a little bit later. Those are guys who are under heavy suspicion, to put it mildly, of steroid use, and asked that question to Pete. And Pete starts going, I'm at a table maybe, 20 feet away from the dais, just in the mix. And Pete said, Barry and Roger, I know those guys. Sure, they should be in the Hall of Fame. They're friends of mine. I like those guys. I like everybody. I really like all these players. I like everyone except for that guy. And he points right at me. So the great news was that my status in the room suddenly swelled. Everybody's like, oh my God, Pete doesn't like you. That's great. Like he knows who you are. But Pete also then gave me a little wink. He knew I was doing my job, and was totally fine with it. And after the book came out, and an excerpt ran of the cover story on Sports Illustrated, Pete was thrilled. He calls me. I'm at home in my kitchen with my wife. It's the day the cover come down, the book hits the stands, and I said to my wife, "Oh, it's Pete." She's like, "Pete who?" I was like, "What is Pete? It's Pete Rose." And then he loved me from then on, because I got him on the cover of Sports Illustrated. So I have a good relationship with him now. I've followed him afterwards for various stories, but a professional relationship. I'm not on his side. I'm not against him. I try to be totally objective. You want to jump down a little bit now, Larry?
Kostya, there was a couple of questions in here.
Sure.
Did Rose bet on his own team?
Yep. So Rhodes, he did not bet on his own team. I mean, the first thing you want to think about, like, what bookie would possibly take that bet? I'm the manager of the team, and I'm going to bet on my team to lose. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, right? No bookie would do that. So the question really is, did he intentionally throw a game? Now, if you were to go up to the Hall of Fame, as I did, or someplace else, and have the Dowd report come out, John Dowd was the lawyer who investigated and built the case against Pete Rose, who showed time after time how clear it was. Why don't you hold there for 1 second, Larry? Just leave that up for a minute. How clear it was that he had bet on baseball. It's, you see it and you just wonder what the legal bills were. There's just huge shelves of documents on Pete Rose, and there's not one piece of evidence that suggests he bet on his own team. I went back, I spoke to people again. It's never come up. Of course, anything is possible. Might he have? He certainly wasn't that he had a moral compass that would have prohibited him from. I don't know that, but he bet on his team to win, and he wasn't very good at it. He owed a lot of money. One thing I want to say also, it's not as if he just betting casually. It's not as if like Jeff and Larry say to each other, "Hey, I'll put $10 on the Yankee game today." Okay, great. Or buy you a beer if the other team wins. He owed $500,000 to like Vinny in Staten Island, which is the wrong people to owe money to. And these are people who are coming into the clubhouse. This was serious betting. This was seriously endangering the game. It was not pussyfooting around.
Is it, Costa, is it possible that when Dowd made that comment, and then I think it said in one of these stories I read in an interview in 2002, he insinuated that he felt he bet against his team, but he couldn't prove anything. You know, it almost reminds me of how politicians keep throwing things out there for the public to think about, even though there's nothing behind it. It sounds like he didn't have anything, but could that have influenced the Hall of Fame in reconsidering the ability to have him, put back on the ballot?
It's a good question. I mean, and I'm super suspicious of Dowd saying that, right? Like he was did a really, really good investigation. It's like shooting fish in a barrel, very easy. Within a couple of days, they had dozens of people out there testifying. They had bank slips, they had documents. It was clear, right? And part of the reason why the Pete didn't like to pay his bets. So he had a lot of like small time bookies pissed off at him also, who were very happy to give him up. But John also, and I got into this a little bit with him too, halfway through my interview. He's a big guy. He's standing up and saying, "Who sent you here? Did Selig send you here? Well, what are you doing here? You're trying to come after?" I was like, "No, man, I'm just doing my book." He's got a huge ego. He doesn't like it that anybody has any affection for Pete or any appreciation for Pete. He's known to be a little elastic with the facts, not in documents. He's a really good lawyer, but he talks a little fast and loose. So I don't put much stock in him saying that. Again, there was just nothing there. I sort of retried the case with much less resources, but still looked at everything with the advantage of time and everything and distance. And there was no suggestion. But whether or not him bringing that up or people be suspicious, I guess if they really just don't do any homework whatsoever and just go on rumor, maybe it would influence them, but I don't know that it did. So here I just wanted to leave this up. This is, of course, when he broke the all-time Major League record. Cobb has since, a guy can hit even when he's dead, he gets a couple of extra hits. He now has 4,193 hits because they found, 4,189 hits instead of 91, because they found through research that one game had been counted twice. But at the time it was 4,191. This is an incredible event for baseball for Cincinnati when this happened in 1985. He got a 9-minute standing ovation. And if you go stand in front of your mirror and clap for 9 minutes, you'll get a sense of how long that is. That is an incredibly long time. It's a moving moment in baseball history, and part of why Pete retained such loyalists to this day, even against the facts. So let's bring up, he did publish a book called My Prison Without Bars, which was supposed to be a little bit of a mea culpa, but it was really, I think in the book I call it a tea culpa. He blamed everybody else. And he said that he bet on Red games, but not on him. One thing, it seems like we're leaning in this way, and you guys all, men and women, seem like really good baseball fans. You think about how might he have influenced the game, even if he's betting to win, what could the detriment be, right? And to me, the only thing I could really think of, essentially every manager is trying to win every game. The only real thing where it gets a little murky might be in like relief pitcher usage over the course of a season, right? You might not use a guy because, hey, we got 162 to play. I've used him a bunch of times. I'm going to give him a couple days off. That kind of thing. So I really looked hard at that angle to see if there were times when Pete was sort of playing it like Game 7 of the series, when he should have just been playing it like a midsummer game. It's pretty nuanced difference. There's not a lot of difference, but there's one guy, Rob Murphy. I don't know if you guys remember him. He's a pretty solid middle reliever, sometimes closer, who had a lot of appearances for the Reds. Then he got traded, traditionally had a lot of appearances. he swore to me that Pete, he never put him in when he didn't want to. He said, I would have pitched more if I could have. So I didn't find any evidence of him influencing a game in this way. The other thing is that he tended not to bet when Gullickson was pitching. Didn't have a lot of faith in him. So some people felt like that was a signal to the bookies, but it speaks to the point that any kind of betting sends the wrong message and sends us down a slippery slope. So that was happening. And I will say one thing, I reported this book more than 90 years after the Black Sox scandal in 1919. And the number of times that came up by people in baseball talking about it, referencing it as the lessons they've learned. I mean, that thing scared the bejesus out of them, right? Because if people think your game's on the level, they're not going to come. They'll go to a wrestling match because we know that it's not on the level and it's big and theatrical and there's music and explosions and a drama. And we'll go to Broadway, even though we know, I don't want to spoil it, but Hamlet dies in the end. We'll still go, but we're not going to go to our ball games if we think it's not on a level. You want to jump down a little bit more, Larry?
As we're doing that, maybe we can just pick up a couple of questions because they're coming into the
Great.
chat. Like, what did the teammates on the Reds and Phillies tell you about Pete? Did you get any?
Yeah, I spoke to a lot of them. I spent time with Bench and Morgan, and some of the best stuff I got were from sort of Schmidt was wonderful. Schmidt sent me his great. He loved Rose, right? So here's some of the things about Rose. Rose plays for the Reds, and in the early '70s they get Joe Morgan, who's kind of an all-star caliber player, but a little erratic for Houston. And Sparky Anderson brings him in and says, here's your locker. It's right next to Pete Rose's. And Joe Morgan becomes a 2-time MVP, and you don't take a day off if you're lockering next to Pete Rose. And he made Morgan believe that he could be the best player in baseball and that he could help you win games, even when he wasn't hitting a home run, even when he wasn't stealing a base. There were different ways he could do that. He did the very same thing for Mike Schmidt, who swears by Pete. He went over to Philadelphia as a free agent in '79. Same kind of thing. Schmidt was a really good player, no question. With Pete next to him and driving him, he became the best player in baseball, perhaps the best player of his era. And much the same. I spent a little time with Schmidt, and then a few days later, he sent me an email, which it's beautifully done. If you do see my book or pick it up, I just took the email and printed it because it's almost like a haiku. It's really a gentle description of what Pete did for him. I also a lot of sort of guys like Doug Flynn and Greg Gross and Jerry Royster, Larry Christensen. Pete was really good to the secondary players, the sort of contributors. He always honored Greg Gross so much for being a great pinch hitter. Oh, I could never do what you do. Christensen told me one of my favorite stories on the book, which is he was a pitcher. Christensen was a pitcher for the Phillies. And, if anybody's from Philadelphia has been there, they'll boo anybody. They'll eat their young down there in the sports town. And there's this one guy booing the what out of the Phillies and out of Pete Rose. He's wearing a gas station uniform, like a Sunoco gas station. This is as Larry Christensen tells me. And Pete, as he goes up, he's sitting, the fan is sitting down the third base line, about the level of third base, maybe 15, 20 rows back, standing up, yelling. And Pete, before he goes up, he turns to the bench and goes, watch this, and he winks. Pitch comes in, he lines it, and he hits the guy.
Oh.
Hits the guy. And Christensen just said, after that, whatever Pete wanted, we would have done whatever he wanted to do. That was a great story. But I spoke to a lot of teammates, and they're all. One thing about Pete, he was beloved at the field, but he probably never had dinner with a teammate in his life, pretty much. Slightly exaggerating, right? And of course, there were team dinners, but he wasn't a social guy going out. He didn't drink at all. That was one thing. And he wanted to play baseball. He wanted to watch baseball. He wanted to watch other sports, bet on baseball, bet on other sports. He's not the guy who's like sort of, yes, let's go out and, linger over tea and talk about the midterms. He's doing his thing.
Just to clarify one other question, Richard asked, is it illegal for baseball players to place a bet using either DraftKings or FanDuel during the off season? So I'm assuming on other sports. Is that in any way an issue? And I guess another question that I might add on to that would be, can a player in any way ever bet on another team? Apparently Pete Rose's big infraction was on his own team. Could a player make a bet on another team? It doesn't seem like they should, but could they?
So it's a good question. Thank you, Richard and Jeff. It's so you can't bet on any. Let's stick to baseball for a minute. You cannot bet on any baseball team, period. So Jeff, Pete's crime was not just that he bet on his own team; it's that he bet on baseball, period. That's the extension that he was the manager and betting on his own team. Nobody's allowed to bet on any baseball whatsoever, and that was true then, and that's true today. It always had been that you could bet. Certainly, you could legally bet, right? So you couldn't in those days. There was no legal sports betting except in Vegas. But you could have legally bet certainly on the horses. It's guys Don Zimmer practically lived at the horse track, and same with other folks. So I honestly, I'll be honest, I don't know the rule for that, but if it's consistent, it would have been hard to make it different. You could bet on, say, football or basketball or whatever it might be, through DraftKings or FanDuel. I'm not 100% sure that they haven't put in some kind of a codification against those particular groups, just because they're also sponsors. They sponsor your Mets and Yankees game. They sponsor MLB. So it's possible. I'm not 100% sure, but the spirit of being able to bet on other sports is intact.
Okay, thank you.
Kostya, I had sort of an observation from what you said about Pete Rose's enormous positive influence on his teammates in Cincinnati and Philadelphia. Just from a fan's observation, successful teams have one or two guys like that really have a positive impact, even if they're not the best players. Have you found that over time, on successful teams?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that there tends to be somebody who absorbs the light a little bit, right? And sometimes it's the best player, and sometimes it's usually a very good player. I'm trying to think like who those figures are now. Lindor has certainly been that for the Mets, and he'll never have a more impressive season than he had when in last year when he was terrible, but came and stood up and took it every single time and didn't miss a game and went back. That's when it's tough.
Even Max Scherzer has been said to have a tremendous influence.
Yep, that's right, exactly. Like you're talking about work ethic and all that. That's there's no question. I go back to somebody like Dale Murphy, was known for having that kind of influence. There are certain guys, Nolan Arenado, a huge guy in that sense, a big reason why the Cardinals wanted him. But ultimately, you have to perform a little bit. Like Eric Hosmer is a little bit of that kind of player, and came into San Diego, and he's still deeply respected and a really good player, great fielder, but he's underperformed offensively, and so that hurts a little bit, right? It really helps. Not necessarily, again, you don't have to be putting up Mike Trout numbers, but to be a really consistent, tough player, pitcher, whatever it might be. So yeah, I think that's fair enough. Even Jeter, right, who's hailed as this leader and was a tremendously the most important cog on sort of a 4-cog machine, but he was never close to being the best shortstop in baseball during those years, right? There were always 3 or 4 guys who were just empirically more productive, but his leadership and all that was critical.
All right, Paul, I think you've been patiently waiting. Go ahead. Again, unmute yourself.
Thank you, Jeff. Kostya, nice to be able to talk to you. One question fast and one observation. Question. I don't mean to split hairs. I don't remember. Did a Pete Rose bet only while he was a manager, or did he also bet while he was a player? And the observation is, I think it's a travesty that Bud Selig is in the Hall of Fame while he was utterly complicit in completely turning a blind eye towards the rampant steroid use during his tenure as commissioner. If he is in, Rose solely as a player should be in as well.
Great observation. Yeah, so that's George Selig, and I throw in about Tony La Russa, also another guy. Not that he was complicit, but he certainly did. Well, I guess he was because he didn't say anything. But his managing those A's teams with Canseco and McGuire, and then managing the Cardinals gets him to the Hall of Fame as a great manager. But those players aren't going anywhere. He was managing players that were using steroids and having his reputation helped by that. So yeah, so your point on Selig is really good. Paul, I'm sorry, just remind me, what was the question?
Yeah, did Rose gamble only while he was a manager, or did he also gamble as a player?
So he unquestionably gambled as a player as well. The case that Dowd built, and I actually I found out that he'd bet on the '84 World Series, and that, you know, when you do a book like this, you're finding out new stuff that you've never seen before, and I hadn't known that until I found it out from that time that he had bet on the '84 series while he was obviously still active in the game. So he betted the player. The case, and Dowd said that this is because it was all they needed. The case was built around his betting as a manager, but partly because that's when it was happening, right? He'd been out of the game for 3 years, and they had just so voluminous information about him as a bettor, the manager, that's really what they focused on. And I should say, you know, this whole Hall of Fame question is so bizarre, because when Giamatti was asked at the press conference, well, will your banning him from baseball keep him out of the Hall of Fame? He looked around at a room full of sports writers and said, well, that's up to you guys, right? They weren't trying to keep Pete out of the Hall of Fame. They were just saying, we don't want you to coach. We can't have you in our clubhouses if you're betting. The Hall of Fame, 10 guys who decided, hey, let's keep this guy out. We don't like him. And to me, I've tried to stay neutral on the point of whether he should or should not be in the game. I see it be in the Hall of Fame. I see it both ways. You know, such an incredible player we've talked about, but also a serious violation of baseball ethics. What's sort of unforgivable to me is that they prohibited from being on the ballot. From just let him get voted on, right? Like Bonds and Clemens and everybody else, Sosa, they're all being voted on, and they should be. And there's probably people on this call that feel both ways about whether they should or should not be in, and that's fine. There's a lot that's not great about the Hall of Fame voting process, but it's pretty democratic. There's 600 voters. Like, for the most part, they get it right. And the idea that they weren't allowed to have just Pete be on the ballot, that's a mistake. And then go ahead and vote no if you want to vote no. So if you go up one, or just people remember there was that one picture of Pete signing. This is kind of what he was doing during the years that I was with him, and still doing today for the most part. Signs autographs. He'll write anything on there for the right price. He'll write, I shot JFK. He'll write, you know, the only thing he would not write is some woman wanted him to write, like, thanks for the great time last night. And he wouldn't write that. But he'll write, you know, I was the first man on the moon, Pete Rose, something like that, whatever you want. The next slide was about a show that was on the Learning Channel, Hits and Misses, and that was his putative fiance. They were never going to get married, Kiana, who was kind of a semi-clad model when they got together, and there were sort of twin parallel narratives in this series. One was Pete going to get in the Hall of Fame, and the other was Kiana going to get a breast reduction. Pete was firmly against the breast reduction, and so there was a lot of drama about that. But this is the kind of stuff that Pete was mixing around with. You want to go on here? Just more like the kind of stuff we see him doing, different events, trying to make a living. Here at the Hard Rock Casino. You know, you could spend a couple $1,000 or $5,000, whatever it is, and have Pete have dinner with you, a few of you, plus you get the dinner, you know, at a steakhouse in Vegas. So he finds different ways to leverage it. Here, this is a great. So the other thing I want to say is, and just pause here for 1 second. When Manfred took over, Rob Manfred, they among all the other different things they were doing, but they reevaluated the Pete Rose situation. They wanted to look at it again, and Bud Selig was never going to reevaluate Pete Rose because he loved Bart Giamatti, and he felt that Rose was partly responsible for Giamatti dying at an early age of a heart attack, which he did just less than 2 weeks after closing the Rose case, which had all its drama and all the pressure on it. Giamatti was very much not in good physical condition. He smoked 5 packs of cigarettes a day. One thing he said to Faye Vincent was, you know, I've done a lot of things, but the one thing I'm really world class in is smoking. I'm a smoker. So it's hard to pin it on Pete, but certainly the stress of that case didn't help. I just bring that up because Selig was not going to reevaluate, but Manfred came in, not that this was top of the list or anything, but it was on the list, and eventually they got around to reevaluating the Pete Rose case, and they looked at it, and they did what they had to do, which is say, no, you can't come back in the game, partly because he was still betting on baseball. He would finish signing autographs in Vegas and go down to a window. Maybe probably now he does it on his phone, but this was still 6-7 years ago. He was doing it in person, and bet on that night's game or games. But what Rob and I actually went in. They asked me to come in, and I spoke with them a little bit just about Rose at that time because I knew a lot about the situation. But Rob said very specifically, but this is not meant to say keep him ineligible for private museums or anything. He's eligible to be part of any other part of baseball. He just can't coach. He can't be in a uniform on our field. And the next day, the Reds Hall of Fame, which is a wonderful Hall of Fame museum, if you ever happen to be in Cincinnati, it's like a mini Cooperstown. It's great. Put Pete in and commissioned this statue, which then went up about 1.5 years later. So in many ways, Manfred opened that door, that sort of artificially created barrier. And this they have bench, and I think Joe Nuxhall and Tony and Joe Morgan out there in Cincinnati in statues. You want to go down one more? Yeah, here he is coming in head first. Earlier we saw him going in head first into home plate. He said he liked going in head first because he felt he got there quicker, and also it helped him get his picture in the paper because it's made for some great photos of him sliding head first. Are there any? Let me just jump here and see if there's any questions. Well, why don't you stay on that for a minute? That'll segue to the next point.
If you look at this picture, I think one of the questions I might have thrown in there was, we know what's going on with the Aaron Judge ball.
Yeah.
When you talked about there was a 9-minute standing ovation for him setting the record that day, it looked like there were quite a few empty seats though in the stands. So I'm wondering, what has the value been of that ball, whoever got it, and has it been affected either way by the notoriety around his appropriateness for the Hall of Fame?
I don't know what's happened to the ball. I can't answer that. My impression was that I didn't realize there were so many empty seats. I thought it was pretty full that day, but if you recently watched the video, then that must be the case. But I do know that Marge Schott was like hoping that he wouldn't get the hit for another day, just like the Yankees kept hoping that Judge wouldn't break the record, right? Because you get a great crowd the next day for the longer you go. Once he's hit 62, you might only get 35 instead of 42 out at the stadium. But I don't know what that is. In terms of the interest, there's no question. I mean, that's the great paradox. By leaving him out of the Hall of Fame created so much more interest in Pete Rose. They made his signing career, his Nobody had a career like, you know, what are we now? We're close to 40 years after retiring. Nobody else in baseball is coming close to being out there like multiple days a week, literally signing autographs. But Pete, and it's because of this controversy, right? So the value of anything has been affected, as he said, like that's his shtick, not being in the Hall of Fame, you know. And so they did a great, while he deprived himself. I want to say he earned his banishment fair and square of being able to make a living in the game. The Hall of Fame shutting him out created a great economic opportunity for Pete Rose, and made this sort of second act possible.
To the baseball writers of America who are still trending toward the more conservative, but I think the younger people, like we have Dave Lennon come often, they are very open about voting for the steroid era people. As the older people age out or retire, are they going to, I guess my question is, if these hundreds of writers, do they have any influence on affecting change in the status of Pete Rose?
I mean, they have soft power, like the way Queen Elizabeth did, right? They can say some stuff, but if Parliament is there, it's a 10-person board in Cooperstown that makes a decision on who's eligible and not eligible. They could make a rule tomorrow, Jeff, which says you're not eligible for the Hall of Fame if you're on the baseball's ineligible list, unless you wore number 14 and played for the Reds. Right? They made up a totally random rule that singled out one person. They dressed it up to look like something else, but that's what it was. And they could change that rule however they want it. But the writers can make noise about it either way. And I don't know how many people care to make noise about it. I don't know how, if people really want to take up that baton and there's a split decision, but they would have no power on doing it.
All right, thank you. I know we're starting to run out of time, and you wanted to maybe transition a little bit to Joe.
So I just wanted to, I thought I'd talk briefly about Joe DiMaggio. I heard you guys talk about Aaron Judge, and he's obviously had this spectacular, wonderful season. And a big part of it, here we see Pete Rose and Jose Canseco. At one time, we were doing Sportsman of the Year, and I was writing for the magazine at Sports Illustrated, but also online. And all of us, I was a senior writer at the time, and every senior writer was asked to write like sort of another sports person candidate, which was meant to be kind of in jest. I can't remember who got it that year. It wasn't really meant to be your person, but somebody who deserved consideration. And I picked Jose Canseco. And I picked him because he came out with that book for selfish reasons, juiced to sell a book, but named all these people who were doing steroids, with 100% accurate on everybody he named, and was the single most important factor in getting the game towards getting cleaned up. He put the pressure on, as Paul earlier talked about how Bud Selig turned a blind eye to steroids. Canseco's book, more than any other single thing, and there are other things certainly, put the pressure on baseball establishment. You can't ignore this anymore. It was incredibly valuable, right? And he, of course, was a known and admitted steroid user. So what I want to talk about here, and Larry, while I'm talking, if you just want to go to the next slide presentation, that's great.
Pastor, would you like for him to use that Jolton Joe DiMaggio piece? We also had that stored, I think. Do you still have it, Larry?
Maybe we do it at the end, I think, but let me just get,
okay.
I think it might be better to
Okay, we'll save it.
Connection, I think, because Judge is top of everybody's mind. So there's a lot of discussion and excitement about Aaron Judge hitting 62 home runs, which is incredible, right? The only guys who've hit 60 home runs have all been Yankees, right? Except for that one season. And it was seen as, Roger Maris Jr., as many of you have seen, and maybe as many of you feel, and I kind of feel, say that, okay, he's the rightful batting champion. Until we find out anything about him having done steroids or anything, which absolutely no reason to believe whatsoever, he's the not batting champion, single season home run champion. And the reason for that is because we had, there's been, whatever there are, there's been now 8 guys, 8 60+ home run seasons in baseball history. Maybe now it's 9, so don't hold me to it. But 6 of them occurred within 5 years, right? Sammy Sosa did it 3 times. There's something going on. Like whatever else people want to say that, oh, everybody was doing it, and the relief pitchers were doing it too. You can't ignore that. There's no other comparable record in baseball or in sports at all, which compared to that. So something was clearly going on. And when I did this book on DiMaggio this came out in 2011, and it was after Cal Ripken had broken Lou Gehrig's games played record. That was probably the single most exciting sporting event I've ever been to in my life, and I've been to numerous Super Bowls and Stanley Cup Final, the World Series, and all that. But watching a guy play 4.5 innings at shortstop somehow made it to be the most exciting game I've ever been at. It was so tremendous to see him tie and then break Lou Gehrig's record. So that record for consecutive games played was gone. Hank Aaron's record was gone from Barry Bonds. And so, of course, was Roger Maris's at that time. But 56, which I think many of you know, but it's the batting streak, hitting 56 games in a row in 1941, remained. And I thought it was appropriate to bring up today in light of Judge, because it's the kind of record that I wonder what you guys think. If you think that it will be broken, or why it hasn't been broken, or whether this is a record of any note or not. And Larry, you could go through. I want to get to a little number towards the end. This was the single most important thing in Joe DiMaggio's life. My book focuses on 1941, and this hitting streak, and here he is in the middle of it. This is the picture that's also, well, not quite the same picture, but a similar picture to the cover of my book from that same streak. I pause here 1 second. I kind of make the case in there that 56 game hitting streak, which came in 1941 when we were on the verge of going to war. World War II had begun, of course, but America would not officially be until that December. Some people calling it the last innocent summer, the very fragile time. There's a lot of anti-Italian bias. And DiMaggio goes on this 56 game hitting streak, and all of a sudden he goes from being a really famous ball player to your great grandmother is asking you, did Joe get a hit today? He jumps from sports star to cultural icon. And who knows if he ever even married Marilyn Monroe years later? Who knows if he ever fits into a song by Paul Simon, Where Have You Gone, Joe DiMaggio, if it wasn't for this hitting streak. It was an absolutely captivating event, and stands out. So you want to go down a little bit further? The other tie-in is, here he is with Lou Gehrig. When I first spoke with Rose, I mentioned that I spoke to him while doing this book. I went out and he was signing autographs in Vegas, and I sat with him, and Pete Rose hit him 44 straight games in 1978. And he's the only one who's come close, right? So to give a sense of that, 44 to 56 is about 80%, a little just over 80%, about 81%. So that's like somebody hits, 700, stay on this for a minute. Somebody hits 700, or actually go to the one right above if you don't mind, Larry, thank you. Somebody hits 700 home runs, and the next guy is at 560. That's roughly the difference between a 56 game hitting streak and a 44 game hitting streak. So the biggest question you get around statistics is, how would it have changed over the eras? Was this just because, hey, it wasn't segregated, right? So he was playing in an all-white league. So much talent was not in the major league then that is now. Guys had smaller gloves. He faced something like 45 pitchers during his hitting streak, or a little more than that, but guys faced more pitchers in 2 weeks than he faced in his whole hitting streak, because guys went on longer. So there was pitcher usage, it was very different. Would it still hold today? So if you can go to the next slide now, Larry. I just did this as an exercise, right? To show this is what really matters, right? It's just how likely are you to get a hit? How hard is it to get a base hit? Nothing else matters. Home runs don't matter. Walking is bad in a hitting streak, right? Because it deprives you of a chance to get a hit. And if you look at it, if you go back to 21, you can see that overall it's kind of a downward trend in batting averages. By the way, I chose 1980 there, you'll see, instead of 81, just because it was a strike shortened interrupted season. So I just thought, whatever, maybe it's not exactly kosher. Let's do a regular full season. 41 is the year that DiMaggio broke the record, hitting 56 straight. Remember, guys were not hitting in 56 straight games or 50 games or 48 straight games back then either. It's not like it was, Ted Williams never hit more than 23 straight games in his life because he walked so much, and he's the greatest hitter of all time. But you go through them all of the downward trend, and it kind of goes up a little bit, right? So in 2001, and I use the American League just for consistency with the DH. Now, obviously, both leagues have them, but just for consistency over time. It was easier, quote unquote, or you were more likely to get a hit every time you came up if you were a hitter in the American League in 2001 than you were in 1941. That's changed most dramatically. Like even in 2011, the years right before and right after, the batting average was in the 260. More recently, it's really dropped, and I'm sure you guys have seen it and talk about it because of the high premium on power and the high premium on strikeouts by pitchers. Of course, the defensive shifts have all conspired to lower batting averages and make it much, much harder. We're not even seeing hit streaks into the 30 these days, which in themselves are quite rare. So anyway, I thought that might be a point to bring up if you guys wanted to touch on it again, vis-a-vis the notion of records. I'll tell one quick story on this again about records, which may resonate with you guys as New York sports fans, as I think many of you are. While I was reporting this book, Gary Sheffield was with the Mets, and I went down to talk to him. He just hit his 500th home run, which he'd hit as a Met. And I went down to talk to can I curse on this Zoom or not?
Maybe best not.
Being recorded.
Depends on what you're using.
Okay, let's see how. Don't ever come into a baseball locker room with me if that's the case. All right, I just want a fair warning. So I go up to Sheffield, and I'm like, as I was talking to a lot of players in those days, so sort of part of my book is modern chapters about the way the streak resonates today. And I asked him if he knew who had the longest hitting streak in baseball. He's like, no, I don't know that. If I followed that stuff, I would know it, but I don't follow it, so I don't know it. That I could not argue with. I said, okay. And then he got his glove on, he's like throwing in his uniform, he's about to go out. He walks away. I'm talking to, I can't now remember who it was, but anyway, like an infield, and he comes back and he says, who has that streak anyway? How long is it? And I said, it's Joe DiMaggio. It's 56 games. And he just stopped Sheffield and he goes, man, that is the long friggin' hitting streak. He didn't say friggin'. But so I said, you know what, you're right. And I tell that story. That is a long friggin' hitting streak. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up, as I said, vis-a-vis the notion of records and Aaron Judge. I'm very happy to stay on for a little while longer and ask any questions about this. Answer any questions about Pete Rose. And just, I have a book out this year in 2022. It's called True, The 4 Seasons of Jackie Robinson. I've been doing a fair amount of media on that book. It came out in April. I was up in the Hall of Fame just a couple of weeks ago. And so happy to talk about Jackie as well. It was this was a labor of love. My other book is on it's Lasting Impact, One Team, One Season, What Happens When Our Sons Play Football. And I followed a high school team for a year in New Rochelle, New York, and really looking at the benefits and obviously the dangers of playing football as a young person. And as I tend to do, I don't really come out on the side of either way, but try to present the question there for people to think about.
Okay, I thank you. We're going to definitely be looking at the Jackie Robinson book when we do our Black History Month in the second semester. But getting back to another one, and I think Len will be right with you too. Go ahead, Len. You go first. You sound good that way.
I think you're muted, man.
You're good now.
Well, I think it's unlikely that DiMaggio's record will be broken. I think it's not impossible, and there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. First of all, the game hasn't changed so dramatically that a hitter can't get on a streak and get that. But let's look at something else. If you want to look at unbreakable records, look at any pitching record. I don't think there's any pitching record extant that will be broken. Not Jack Chesbrough's 41 or Nolan Ryan's strikeouts or any of those, because the game has changed so dramatically with regard to pitching. It hasn't, while it's changed in terms of hitting, it hasn't changed at the same nature as it has in pitching. Those records, unless something dramatic happens and changes, are sacrosanct. You will never see
511 wins for Cy Young. It's never going to happen.
They're just out of reach. There
are some other records. You know, Connie Mack lost 3,500 games as a manager. Okay, the next time you're complaining about Aaron Boone, just remember that. He lost 3,500 games. It helped that he owned the team, right? But no manager is going to come close to losing that number of games.
Can't you see? I see. Think of a guy like Ichiro Suzuki. The next Ichiro Suzuki could hit 57 in a row. I mean,
I agree with you, Len. And so, but I don't think it's breakable. But I say it's the unbreakable of the breakable records is the way I phrase it. Because you're right. There's no reason why you couldn't do it, right? But I'm going to tell you one thing, and I spoke with like Bill James. You guys know that name? He's sort of like the emperor of baseball statistics. He started the baseball
sabermetrics.
Yeah, sabermetrics. He's kind of godfather of that, and a lot of people. There's a chapter at the end of my book just about the odds. Like, what are the odds of this happening? Just strict odds. If you strip away the human element, just of like flipping a coin and all that. It's extremely, 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 extremely unlikely by people who've run simulations of seasons 10,000 times. But the one thing I want to say is that, did anybody by chance know the minor league record for a hitting streak? It's 61 games, and it was set in a really good minor league, the Pacific Coast League, in the 1930s. And the person who set that record is Joe DiMaggio.
Well, DiMaggio, after he failed, hit in 16 more games straight.
He could hit 72 out of 73 games.
DiMaggio was look, I can honestly say I'm probably one of the few people on this call that saw Joe DiMaggio play. Maybe there's a few others, but I mean, that he was phenomenal. There's no question about it. And
during his streak, Len, he hit 15 home runs during those 56 games, and during that time he struck out 5 times. Right, 5 times is like that's Joey Gallo struck out 5 times in one at bat.
Yeah. The other point I wanted to make, Kostya, you talked about Jose Canseco's book. What about Bouton's book? Bouton exposed greenies and pit pelts years before, and it basically said half the guys are taking them. So if there was ever a time for somebody to say, wait a second, this is a serious problem, it was way back when Jim Bouton published Ball 4.
It's a good point. I want to get to Paul and anybody else with a question. The only thing I will say about that, and I agree with you, that push back on greenies and maybe push back on groupies, right? Based on Jim Bouton's book. Greenies certainly affected people. It made them able to stay up longer and have more energy. It did not transform the game the way performance-enhancing drugs did. It just didn't. I mean, when the rubber hits the road, if you just look at the final measurement, it didn't have that impact on the record book. I'm not forgiving it or saying anything like that. So anyway, and Pete Rose took greenies. They all took them in those days. They would have them in a big bowl. It was like going to get Skittles. You walk into your doctor's office and they have like little candies and Tootsie Rolls. Well, they just had greenies for you out there in the clubhouse, so it was hard to stay away. Paul, I think you have your hand up. You're still muted though.
Okay. To your question as to whether anybody could ever match DiMaggio, while, I've been watching baseball for many years and I don't see anybody around like a Gwynn, a Carew, an Oliva guys who really put the bat on the ball every time up at the plate. There is one rule coming in baseball that I think is going to immeasurably help batters. Nobody ever mentions it, but let me throw it out there, curious. When they institute the automatic strike zone, you know, that little square that you see on the games, I have a feeling that that's going to help batters, because I think if you ask the batters as to whether they're getting screwed on calls more than pitchers who think they're being squeezed, I think that most everybody would say that it's really plate umpires who have extraordinarily large strike zones that I think now are going to be replaced by a much tighter strike zone from that little square. Pitches, I think, are going to have to be much more accurate in order to get a called strike. And I think that that's going to help batters.
That's a great point, and I think you're right. We do have Jeff McNeil, and there are a couple of guys out there who are bat on the ball type guys, but not nearly as many as you're talking about. You know, the question is going to be, what is that electronic strike zone going to look like? Is it really going to be sort of like mid chest to top of the mid thigh, or is it going to be kneecap to armpit? Right. So there's some that hasn't been established exactly what it's going to be. But if it is as tight as they show on TV, which tend to be tighter than it really is, I agree. It makes it easier to barrel the ball. There's been a lot of talk about Judge in particular. He's been a topic here, but he's such a tall player. A lot of times loses the low strike. Have a pitch call on him to maybe down a little bit because his knees are higher up off the ground. So it's going to be interesting. You're right, and maybe it will have an impact. And maybe again, if that batting average goes up, that's really what we're looking at. How easy, whatever the factors are, you would think that even the 3-out rule for a relief pitcher would make it incrementally, ever so slightly easier to get a hit, right? For that reason, the lack of the shift after 150 years of letting people play wherever they wanted to play, we're now going to, you know, prohibit the zone defense like in basketball. And even that, well, I don't know what the effect is going to be, because guys aren't going to have to hit. Now at least some guys learn to go the other way, learn to put the bat, you know, bunt down to beat the shift. Now there's really not going to be any incentive to do anything but try to hit the ball over the wall. So we'll see what happens. But I think that, honestly, Paul, I hadn't really thought about that in this context, and I think you're right. I think overall it will benefit batters, and it may indeed have an impact on hitters on the hitting streak. Anything else?
Just a question. One of the things that I noticed when I started researching, you know, as Judge closed in on the record, there were just a handful of people that have ever approached those lofty numbers. And in looking, it seems like it only happened in the National League. So I have two questions for you. One, when McGuire came up and he set the record at that time in the American League with Oakland, which Judge eventually broke when he became a rookie, was, I guess, were the steroids better or more, maybe they were using expired steroids when A-Rod and Canseco were hitting home runs compared to the National League, because they were exceeding 60 and the American League guys were only getting in the 50s. Was there a difference, or was it just the athletes, or was it luck, or the pitchers? What do you, does anybody ever look at that?
I think it's pretty random, right? It's a pretty small pool of players we're talking about. McGuire was a one-dimensional player who was only trying to hit home run. A-Rod, you know, he gets portrayed as a selfish person, which maybe he is, very much about himself, but he wasn't a selfish ball player on the field. And he wasn't necessarily trying to hit a home run. I mean, of course, he wanted to hit home runs, but he was also trying to drive the ball and hit line drives and go the other way, if you go back and look at how he was. So there's the guy. You know, you had a freakish thing, and Sosa happened to play in this league. I guess the guys who were, Palmeiro had a big seed. I can't remember now who were up there. You know, Bonds too. I mean, that's a guy who the most anybody has ever been walked in a season was 46 outside of Barry Bond. Had been intentionally walked with 46. I think it was Pujols. And Bonds had been intentionally walked more than that in the season. He was walked 120 times intentionally. one year. So he had something, while I don't think he should be in the Hall of Fame, and he, if you look at his production after age 37, it's so off the charts with what human athletic capability has been in any sport that it's hard to accept it. But he was an incredibly talented, great athlete. That much is true, right? McGuire might not have impressed us in any way if he wasn't hitting at least 40 home runs. Barry Bonds was one of the best players in the league when he was hitting 30 and stealing however many bases and playing the best left field in the game. So I don't know, Jeff, it's an interesting point, but I think it may just be chance of that particular era.
Okay, look, we really, really thank you for staying with us beyond 1 o'clock. I would like to ask anyone that, if you have any additional questions, you can send them to me. I'll forward them to him. But in fairness, I know you've got other obligations. You have a real job. We're just enjoying your visiting with us. And
I appreciate it. I appreciate being on with you. I remain a Stony Brook fan. I don't know how many of you out in the neighborhood, but love Long Island. It's I miss it. I live in Westchester now, and you guys are great question, thought provoking. Pleasure to be here with you. So anytime, Jeff.
Thank you again. We're going to take a look at those Joe DiMaggio clips maybe after you leave, but we thank you so much and look forward to keeping in touch.
All
Thank
right,
you, Kostya.
my pleasure. Take care, everybody. Thank you.